The way we're going to run this now is we have three members of the panel who've not yet spoken to you. So they're going from the table are going to give you a few opening comments, and then we'll open the floor to questions for discussion. So I would like to start clearly with the Lord Mayor, because we've heard the views of Lord Mayors around the world, so it's perhaps a good opportunity to hear the Lord Mayor of our own fair city, Martin.
Thank you very much. I'd like just to first to acknowledge that we're meeting on Kaurna land and we pay respect to elders past and elders present. Also, I'd like to thank CEDA, Deloitte, Siemens, University of Adelaide for bringing us all together today. Greatly appreciated. City of Adelaide and the topic of today's get-together is extraordinarily timely because I feel we're in an era of what I would call convergence, whereby many of the maybe previously somewhat disparate conversations that we've been having at a city are converging. And they're converging for good reason. If we look at the climate debate, if we look at the transport debate, if we look at economic development, we look at investment attraction, we look at education, knowledge economy, smart city, technology, and so many other matters which we vigorously debate and engage with our communities about in the City of Adelaide. Many of these matters are indeed converging. And it positions Adelaide in many ways uniquely. There's a great body of research around the world which is certainly growing, which says that medium-sized cities, because of their nimble and agile nature, are indeed extremely well positioned. The examples to cite would be, let's look at the climate and sustainability debate. There's an aspiration for Adelaide to be the world's first carbon neutral city. Now, as we're bringing that debate together, that debate is as much about environment and sustainability and climate adaptation, but it's also, of course, about efficiency, it's about transport, it's about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, of course, it's about productivity, it's about brand, it's about reputation, investment, jobs, technology, youth retention. So many matters are all keyed into that key climate and sustainability debate. It's about energy efficiency. And even when I have this discussion with many stakeholders throughout the city, even if they're a climate sceptic, I've never met anyone who's a sceptic when it comes to energy cost savings. So we're in this era of convergence. We also know, of course, that cities are leading the way, nationally, internationally. They're leading the way in terms of new technology, new jobs, new industries, inventions, innovation, investment, population. The City of Adelaide's population is going through now the most sustainable, measurable level of residential growth than we've had in many decades. Notwithstanding, in 1914, the City of Adelaide's population was 44,000 people living in the square mile. It's currently 23,726, but growing it now at a rate of well over 1,000 a year. That's the highest growth rate we've had. We have $820 million worth of residential projects in the pipeline. If they all get built, they'll add 5,000 people to the population relatively quickly. So we're on our way to a 30,000 population in the City of Adelaide. We have an aspiration for more. However, it's the challenge to preserve and enhance livability, and it was well spoken to earlier on in terms of our goal and what is our goal in terms of a smart city. But it is a city which welcomes people, enhances livability. Adelaide, of course, is number 5 on the Economist Livability Index across the globe. We want to go up the leaderboard. We want to find ways of increasing that ranking. That livability index is an extraordinary residential and investment attraction catalyst in its own right. So, in this era of convergence, we have issues of livability, we have issues of technology, and if we look at technology very much as the enabler, technology just gets us there. It is the vehicle which gets us where we want to be. We want to be a more livable city. We want to attract and retain new industries and emerging industries. If we look at education, we look at research and development, we look at health, we look at tourism, and particularly we look at ecotourism. There are specific sectors which, as a city, Adelaide is doing well and can do better. These are the industries in many ways which we need to own as a city. City of Adelaide's job is we are a function of local government, of course we are, but we have a duality about what we do. We have the provision of local government services, which is the provision of first-class infrastructure across the city, but we're also the capital city government. And that brings about the whole notion of leadership. The City of Adelaide must lead. We must embrace what's new. So if I can share you in closing, the vision for the City of Adelaide, which the elected members of Adelaide City Council will conclude working on by December, is that of a city of firsts. We want to be first. We want to be first to market. We want to be first to market with technology, with climate, with investment, with livability, with walkability, with social inclusion. Whatever it might be and whatever that means to you, it's absolutely critical for Adelaide to move forward that we're the city of firsts. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Our next speaker to say a few words working down the table is David Rosheim, General Manager of Uber. And we've also heard about Uber already, so perhaps from you, David.
Thank you. It's rare to have the proper German pronunciation. Thank you. Uber has been well described before I get here. Lots of talk also about autonomous vehicles. We are excited about those and in partnership with Carnegie Mellon actually making very big investments in that, but more interested in what's available today, and that's the ride-sharing, the UberX product that's been touched on a few times. The doctor mentioned that a city like Adelaide has probably 1 million vehicles. It's an enormous investment. That's tens of billions of dollars of infrastructure assets, transport infrastructure that's used on average 1 hour a day, which is a big missed opportunity. If one restricts their thinking to how can we make better use of the taxis and chauffeured vehicles in the city, they'll be looking at just 1,500 cars, when there's 1 million cars with spare seats. So with the Uber app, we say, if you're a responsible driver in a safe vehicle, then you can log on and share rides with people who are nearby looking for transport. And by using the assets we already have, those rides can be often half the price of a taxi. And once we layer in Uber Pool, where we're giving multiple passengers the opportunity to share a ride with one driver, the cost comes down further again and approaching public transport costs. What that means is people just don't feel the need to own a car. It requires a few different ingredients, not just Uber, but you need your go-get vehicles for a weekend away, you need good public transport, and you need a bike and some good shoes. Once you've got that menu of options, we're seeing a whole generation growing up saying, why would I want to buy up front an expensive asset that I need to park somewhere, and I need to park it somewhere where I'm going? I can't use it when I'm drunk. I have to insure it, register it, maintain it. Or I could just have a button on my phone. I press a button when I need a ride, and that's it. In my phone, I've got my friends, I've got information, I've got entertainment, and now transport as a service. And what that means is people own fewer vehicles, less cars on the road, so we can help the state achieve its congestion initiatives. People are less likely to drink drive, more likely to use public transport. That's what we want to do here in South Australia. It's not just an idea, it's been done 10 million times in Australia. There's been 10 million UberX rides in the other mainland states. The Minister mentioned a review underway. We've made a submission, 50 pages worth of content there for him to read. We've also hosted the review panel to one of our offices in Sydney. I think there'll be considerable interest in the Minister's response.
Thank you, David. On the segues, I'm being handed here as chair of the session, a tremendous CMU, Carnegie Mellon's been mentioned. And last but by no means least, we have Emil Bolangaita here, who is running the local show here in Adelaide.
Thank you very much, John. Why should South Australia be taking the lead in the connected and autonomous vehicle space in its efforts to be a smart state and for Adelaide to be a smart city. I think one of the compelling reasons, I think, has been very well articulated by Dr. Busch in his talk earlier on the digital revolution, or what we might call the fourth industrial revolution. And David Redhill also, I think, very nicely put it with respect to the purpose of place. But the third and obvious reason really has to do with economics. This is going to be an industry that will be worth hundreds of billions annually. In a recent study by one of the major institutes of connected and autonomous vehicles for the UK, it was estimated that by 2030, the connected and autonomous technologies market in the UK will be worth upwards of £51 billion, or about 110 billion Aussie dollars. And that this industry will create 320,000 jobs, will save 25,000 lives, and prevent over 250,000 serious accidents. So the economic and social arguments for connected and autonomous vehicles are clear, in my view, and in others' view increasingly. Not surprisingly, the UK government has recently announced a couple of months ago that it is setting up a 200 million pounds facility for research and development of connected and autonomous technologies. If you apply the methodologies of the UK study to Australia, and you look at the production and sales of vehicles in Australia, and extrapolate that into the future, we are similarly looking at a very, very huge market for Australia, even if connected and autonomous vehicles are just going to be for the domestic market. But if companies in Australia that are engaged in this advanced manufacturing industry like CEDA Wireless are actually not just producing for Australia, but for the rest of the world, imagine the benefits for our economy here. So I think the arguments for South Australia getting into this space is compelling. The second question for me is, how can South Australia do it? The countries that are leading in this development are in the US and in the UK, and they have been doing it for decades. Carnegie Mellon has been doing it for over 30 years. We established the first robotics institute in the world in 1979. We built the first unmanned vehicle in 1984, the Terrigator, short code for terrestrial navigator for mine exploration and road mapping in caves. And then in 1987, we won the 1987 Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency competition on driverless vehicle. And it was at that point in 1987 that even our scientists and engineers realized that self-driving vehicles are not the stuff of science fiction anymore. And three important spin-offs have occurred since that time. The first is that one of our graduates who built the 1997 vehicle went on to Google, and he now heads Google's driverless vehicle program, Chris Urmson. A spin-off was created, Carnegie Robotics, whose founder, John Bears, was recently hired by Uber to lead its Advanced Technology Center in Pittsburgh. And the third spin-off was Automatica, which was whose software was recently bought by Delphi, one of the top tier 1 suppliers in the world, for the first unprecedented successful coast-to-coast trial of an autonomous Audi from California to New York, driving by itself 98% of the time. So the short answer to the second question of what can South Australia do, given that it doesn't have the time to catch up, nor the really not much of resources at its disposal, what it can do is it can adopt, in my view, a leapfrog strategy. It can adopt a leapfrog strategy by building on its history here of manufacturing, its world-class universities, and cutting-edge firms like CODA Wireless, and partner with what we hope would include Carnegie Mellon, and to leverage our experience so that we can credibly develop and execute such a strategy. And we're very excited about the state of South Australia's leadership in this space. And it's certainly making a big bet in this field, and we hope that it can make the most out of the opportunities that it has to seize the substantial economic, industrial, and social opportunities going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have a roving mic to come around so that you can ask your questions, and while you're thinking of that, I'm going to ask the first one, take privilege. Clearly as an engineer, this is all very exciting. I see lots of work to be done. But one thing we know in engineering is that we may come up with a great technology, but it doesn't mean that people are going to use it. We also have the issue mentioned earlier of the whole governance of this. You know, at the one end we have disruptive technologies coming in, at the other we have governments wanting to try and improve the lot of their citizens. So Martin, can I ask you, how do you see us charting the way forward amongst all of this? Because we have a huge range of opportunities, a huge range of needs, and an awful lot of players involved.
Thank you, John. If I speak specifically about the automated vehicles opportunity, quite coincidentally, for those that don't know, it was actually South Australia that had the first driver's licence issued in 1906. So it's a little bit serendipitous that in 2015 we're talking about automated vehicles, and driver's licence, I would presume, at some point in time will become a thing of the past, and that might be great. However, from a consumer acceptance perspective, I mean, the benefits are just so compelling. From a safety perspective, from a mobility perspective, from a climate perspective, from a productivity perspective, from a technology perspective, I think, and certainly from what I'm reading, that consumer acceptance will certainly come. So it's a matter of addressing not necessarily the what, but possibly the how. How are we going to get there? How are we going to enable this? We heard earlier that the major vehicle manufacturers will have these vehicles in their showrooms variously from 2018 to 2025, all of the major manufacturers. And it now becomes a technology, it becomes a legislative discussion, which I know are being had, which is critical. And if we are to position ourselves and hold that mantle as being a city of firsts, I think we just need to move into this bold future. And to have, of course, in 2015, the first automated vehicle trial in the Southern Hemisphere on the South Australian roads this month, again, I think also talks well to that city of firsts positioning. So I think we've got, it's a large focus on education. Yes, there's technology and there's legislation and there's infrastructure, but a lot of it also is education. But to the consumer, I think the benefits really will become somewhat self-evident, faster than what we may even anticipate. Australia is wonderful in as far as when it comes to the early adoption of new technology, we get it. So I have comparatively few reservations, John, that there won't be widespread consumer acceptance. Even if this technology comes into the market at a higher price, of course, there's the price and volume equation. It will drop in time. So I have every confidence that Australia is well positioned to adopt this.
Okay, thank you. Roland, do you have any observations from other cities and adoption? And who's actually controlling it?
Well, I mean, I put a little bit water in the wine. I guess that it's still a long way, and the legal topic is immense. I mean, currently, if you do have an accident on the road, it's an individual who made a mistake or who didn't, and then that's it. Let's assume now there's an autonomous driving car making an accident. You never know whether this is a serial failure in the car or what is it. And until then, you really have a long discussion what happens. So I mean, it's a lot of obstacles. So if somebody stands there, it's who distinguishes whether it's a policeman or a person trying to stop a car. I mean, a lot of things will happen. And then last point was when I learned about cars driving through California all the way, I was wondering how this car would behave Mumbai downtown. Exactly, it would stay. It would stay after maybe 2 minutes or even 30 seconds, and then would not move. But again, I mean, I know that the whole thing it will come, and the benefits you're saying are evident. So it will be a disruptive change. It might take a little bit longer, but it might be that the change comes not in a global way that you say you have autonomous cars all the way, but maybe in some places supported by infrastructure. Could be in Adelaide, supported by infrastructure. You do need infrastructure in order to tell the car what they're allowed to do and what not. And for example, if you're emergency, you need to have signals, and so therefore the enforcement of law regarding the traffic flow is another one. And I believe this together can really change the picture if a city stays up and really is committed to make a change. So I believe that looking at not from a global perspective, from a local one, that could, for me, be one of the starting points where technology can really hit the road much faster.
Okay, thank you. Now, who would like to pose the first question from the floor? Here, right in the middle.
Yeah, I think we've just heard from some of the speakers about the appetite for South Australians to be both, users and consumers of these new technologies. But I wonder if some of the other speakers can talk a little bit about Emil's vision for South Australia being a producer of such technologies, such as driverless cars.
I'll have a go at that. And I really believe in the power of the mass and the desire of the collective consciousness to actually steer the direction, whether it's personal decisions to go in an autonomous car or to maintain this sort of personal investment in their own, or business people to invest and reap the economic benefit of being first movers. I think South Australia has a golden opportunity, just as any economic centre does, to be the first mover and invest in leading edge technologies. Obviously that carries with it incumbent risk. But I mean, in terms of the previous conversation around appetite, there's always a profile, the adoption curve that we know so well. There's the early adopters and they're out there in the vanguard, and then there is the fast followers, and you get to a certain point which is a tipping point, and you actually get that collective consciousness to go to a new way of thinking about business models, a new way of thinking about business investment, or a new way of thinking about how do I get from A to B. And I think in the end it's a democracy. It's the freedom of individuals to choose how they do. There's never going to be coercion from government to start using a certain way of renting houses or using cars. It'll be ultimately up to people's own decision, and that goes for, and that's determined by, is this a better way of achieving my outcomes? Whether I'm a consumer wanting to get to Adelaide Oval, or whether I'm a businessman wanting to reap better dividends for my shareholders, I'm going to go first, take a long-term view and invest in this technology. So I think it's, we're faced with the same conundrum here that we have been through the ages. Who's going to go first and who's going to win big?
I'd echo the role of the consumer here. If the technology is there and consumers want to use it, then it'll get used, whether the government encouraged people or gave them permission. The efforts around autonomous vehicles are certainly worth applauding, but people were already driving on the roads in Australia with their hands off the wheel prior to South Australia's trials. Tesla released the software a month ago over the air, and people woke up and suddenly their vehicles had autopilot. Tesla didn't ask for permission. They didn't check with the government first. They just thought that's a feature that customers want, and we're going to roll it out. And I've lived through that, where sometimes Uber has put technology out on the streets before the government has officially given it their blessing. The legislation itself is yet to be tested. It essentially enshrines the government as a bottleneck in innovation. It says, if you want to run a trial, you've got to come and get the minister's blessing first. And I don't know, that hasn't been tested. We haven't seen how that's going to play out. I've asked for a trial. I gave my first demonstration to Parliament of UberX in 2014. I asked for a trial in February 2015. Still waiting for a response. So we haven't yet really tested how this legislation is going to work out.
Martin, you had a comment?
I think the opportunities for South Australia, to the question, from a manufacturing, I think the niches will become apparent. Of course, it will be very much an export focus. It will need to be. And I think the work by the likes of Carnegie here is absolutely critical, because the work from academia will identify the niches where academia works with industry. And there are so many peripherals, I think some of which we haven't even identified yet, which will be associated with this opportunity globally. For South Australia, in terms of an export opportunity, in terms of manufacturing, development, software, whichever it might be, around this, it might be for South Australia to identify some of the peripherals and become globally world-leading and competitive in terms of export of those peripherals. I think this journey, in many ways, although I did watch a video, 1960s I think it was a Citroën Goddess DS racing along, driverless, on a track in France. So this has been with us a long time, and I've been educated that, of course, it's all quite incremental. Like the doctor said, is that our first outcome in South Australia could be specific roads which are designated driverless, whereby it could be the Southern Expressway, it could be the Southeastern Freeway, it could be the Northern Expressway, it could be any number, whereby they become the first manifestation on our city roads. And then you throw back to piloting the vehicle in other areas of the city. So it's incremental. And in many ways, we've been on this journey for 30 to 40 years already. It's not new, we just think it's new. So I think our opportunity is to find a niche and to do it globally and to do it well.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a question at the front here.
Yes, to David, and I won't try and pronounce it in the German. I just wonder whether Uber's looked at the mobility as a service offering in your product range, what we're seeing overseas as far as a package of service offerings for vehicles and sharing vehicles. I know you mentioned GoGet, but is that maybe a product that you're involved with and looking at for South Australia? Do you think that would be a good way to expose some of the consumers to, a different service offering for vehicles rather than waiting for the driverless?
Just to make sure I understand the question, so Uber is 100% focused on on-demand transport, press a button, get a ride in 5 minutes or less, and there's other people out there who'll let you borrow a car for a whole weekend. There's other people out there that can arrange a bus service on demand. So we're 100% focused on that. I want a ride from someone nearby right now, and we exist as a complement to others. So that we alone are not a replacement for a car, for owning your own car. Those other bits and pieces of the equation, I think are there's people out there doing it. Is that what you had in mind?
Isn't that what they're doing in Finland with signing up to a package of mobility? With Finland, what they're doing, where it's almost like signing up with a package, like a telephone service provider. You sign up with a package of mobility provider across, all the different types of mobility that you're able to acquire, and that's a monthly service contract arrangement for your personal mobility, family mobility, those sorts of things.
Eager to have the conversation. Many states have got some payment card for public transport, and we'd be open to having conversations with states around getting ourselves embedded in that. There's some data sharing to be done around where people are travelling to and from, and what should the bus timetable be, and where should the next train line be. It'd be fair to say that we haven't those lines of communication aren't open yet, but we'd be keen to be part of that.
We have time for one more question. Do we have a question? Ideally, make it the furthest for the person with the microphone to walk. Is always a good trick. And it almost is.
Lee Dowd from ACOM. Just wonder what our risk in Adelaide is of building redundant infrastructure, given the rapidness of changing technology in infrastructure and the use of it. What's Adelaide's risk to anyone on the panel?
Martin, you want to start?
It's a multifaceted question, but I'll address that with regards to the driverless vehicles. One of the risks, which I believe there is work being done globally on, but it's work in progress, is will automated vehicles, in whatever capacity they are, actually catalyse urban sprawl? Meaning, will it actually incentivise us to live 30, 40, 50, 70, 100 kilometres away from the city? And that's quite game-changing, because much of our debate, we went through this period for decades of decentralisation. We had cities around the world which became donuts. And in certainly the last decade, much of our debate has been around re-centralisation, bringing things back to the hub for commercial, for social, for cultural reasons, for many reasons. There's been a lot of good reason for that, and there's been a lot of good effect. And this is why cities, in many ways, have risen in prominence so much. Driverless vehicles possibly could have a reversing effect on that. And I'd be interested in the expert panel on this. It's very much a kind of an open question, but that would have profound impacts on our infrastructure. And I think the knock-on effect in terms of costs and many other things. So that could be a risk.
Any other comments?
There is, I'd agree with that vision. There's one piece of really good news, though, is in a world where people don't own their own cars, then the parking needs become a lot smaller. You'll just take your autonomous vehicle from place to place. And, Martin will know the numbers for Adelaide, but a significant proportion of most cities' space, 5, 10, 15%, is set aside for parking. In a world where that's less necessary, I think that space is going to get reopened and cities will have an opportunity to do something really cool with it.
Emil?
I think that's a very good question raised by the Lord Mayor. And but one of the things that we should remember is that when we're talking about autonomous vehicles, we're also really talking about connected vehicles. No? So these two are going hand in hand. No? So the autonomous vehicles are not autonomous in the sense that they're independent of the world. No? They're independent of the driver, but they are extremely connected to the world. No? It will be, as in the words of Tim Cook, there will come a time when it will be like an iPhone experience inside the vehicle. No? And this has been alluded to with respect to the technologies related to vehicle-to-vehicle communication, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to, and I think very relevant to Adelaide, vehicle to cyclists, bicyclists, vehicle to pedestrians. You will have technologies developing and being provided in this space, and the vehicle will be super connected to the cloud. And so it'll be a very interesting world out there with individuals inside a very modern and tech environment that can be who can become more productive and empowered. And certainly this will be true for those who are currently not driving at the moment, no? The elderly, the disabled, and other non-drivers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emil. I'd like to now invite the Vice Chancellor and President of the University of Adelaide, Professor Warren Bebbington, who also happens to be my boss, to propose a vote of thanks.